Always a pleasure to be joined by Adam Caplan, longtime writer in the NFL, has been around the block, covers the Eagles, but the entire league. Thanks for spending a couple minutes with me. I appreciate it.
Good to be back with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So let's start with the Eagles beating up on Miami a little bit, who are 5-2, but haven't really impressed against quality opponents. Where do you rank them in terms of their strength in the AFC? Or is that a product of maybe beating up on some bad teams? Do you think they're legitimate?
Yeah, they're a legitimate team, Carolyn. I think when you look at Miami, talking to other teams that have played them, you're always trying to prepare against their speed on offense. Defensively, nice defense under defense coordinator Vic Fangio. Not great yet. He doesn't have all the talent there, particularly at corner because Xavier Howard, he didn't play in the game against Philly with a groin injury, although it seemed like he was going to play Friday, but they held him out. And Jalen Ramsey's yet to play because of the meniscus surgery, though he's getting closer. So he can't really run the defense like he likes. And then you look at their offense, which could be unstoppable. It surprisingly was stoppable. It was stopped. I mean, they only scored 10 offensive points against the Eagles. I didn't see that coming. That surprised me last Sunday night in Philly. So they'll regroup. You mentioned how they've beaten up on the lesser teams. They've done that. I mean, that's really been the story of their season for Miami. But they're still 5-2. They're still one of the best teams in the AFC. I'm really interested to see the rest of the season. Once Howard and Ramsey play together, and Kader Kohu is really a better third corner. See how much better that defense is, because that's a cornerback group you can line up with.
So it doesn't concern you that when you look at what the Bills did against them and what Philadelphia did against them, I mean, combining to beat them by more than 40
Yeah.
points, that's just a reflection on maybe personnel that they don't have?
Yeah. Now again, if Jalen Ramsey is back for the stretch run, I mean, the hope is he'll be back over the next couple weeks. He just returned to practice last week. Remember, he had a very serious knee injury. The meniscus recovery is a minimum of 3 to 4 months. He's trying to come back well in advance of that. So when you talk about Xavier Howard, one of the best corners in the league, to go potentially with Ramsey, that changes everything. And that's what the hope is here, that once those two guys play together, you got one of the best cornerback tandems in the National Football League.
Talk to me a little bit about the Ravens and where you think they stack up in the AFC North. Lamar
Wow.
Jackson
Yeah.
looking great as of late. How good are they?
All right, so now we're more or less at the midway point, depending on how many teams have been off and so forth. All the teams are playing this week. We had byes last week. 6 teams are off. They're back now. So this is one of the weeks we have for the rest of the season that everyone's playing until the byes are officially over. And Baltimore's not had their bye yet. They are 5-2. This was the first week, Carolyn, last week against the much improved Lions, that the Ravens offense was what I thought it would be under Todd Monken, their offensive coordinator. They were very aggressive throwing the football, particularly early. The first 4 drives, I think they threw the ball on the first three plays of each of those drives, which is not what you typically see, particularly in Baltimore, and that was great to see. And Lamar Jackson is very comfortable with that offense. And the other problem is they've been beat up on the offensive line. They've had issues at receiver. OBJ has been in and out of the lineup. They had a full complement of receivers and tight ends, and their offensive line's intact. I expect them to take off. Their defense under Mike McDonald, a young defense coordinator, is played terrifically well, and they're right up there. They're only really a game out of the number 1 seed, which Kansas City holds.
While we're kind of bouncing around the league a little bit, San Francisco 49ers, a couple of consecutive losses here.
Yeah.
It's wild how used we've gotten to, I'm not even sure how that sentence is framed up, but Brock Purdy, I mean, we've kind of gotten used to him, and now we've seen a little bit of fragility there. I mean, are you concerned if you're a Niners fan after these most recent losses?
Look, he had a couple balls sail on him. He typically doesn't turn the ball over, but let's not forget Deebo Samuel didn't play, Trent Williams didn't play, but the more alarming thing is their defense. I mean, Kirk Cousins drops back 45 times. They could not muster pass rush. They didn't have one sack against Cousins. They had a pick, but Cousins was terrific. Jordan Addison, the first round pick, receiver, terrific. Talking to receivers coaches before the draft, he was what they called a fearless guy, a guy that was under 180 pounds, but fearless over the middle. You've seen him do that. He's been terrific. But I don't expect this. Yeah, Purdy's up to 2 weeks ago is having a breakout season. He's their guy. There's no question about that. But I'm not worried about him really. I'm worried about what's happened on the back end. That blitz, which just didn't work at all. I don't know what happened to the pass rush. I can't quite understand what happened last week. But I'm not worried about the Niners. To be honest with you, the conference could be won or lost in a way in Week 13 when they play in Philly, which should be a rematch of the conference game. And I know the Niners, they weren't happy that Purdy left that game, and that'll be in December 3rd here in Philly.
There's so much that's been made, Adam, about the Tush Push play. Should it be in the league? Should it not be in the league? Now that we're kind of back focused on Philly. I mean, where do you come down on this, and how much weight does Sirianni's comments yield when it comes to what the league's ultimately going to do about this?
Yeah, what's funny, you have to select which week he talks about it. So when you talk about Nick Sirianni, the head coach, we don't know exactly whose idea it was to bring in the so-called Tush Push in, but it works, and I kind of laugh. And Nick was talking about this. Other teams try it, but they just can't get it. Clearly, the Eagles last year in the 22 offseason, they developed it. They brought it in. They clearly worked on it hard, and they perfected it. Their percentage of conversion is ridiculously high, and that's why you don't see them throw a lot on 3rd and 2 or third and 1 or 4th and 1 or 4th and 2 because they know they can convert it. Whereas the other teams try it, and they have not been successful. It's just not very successful. Now, what do I stand on it? At first, I'm like, what is this? Is this a rugby scrum? Like, I didn't get it. But it's legal, okay? It's legal. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, the way it's going to work, folks, just to correct people, you can't change rules in season. This will go to the competition committee for a safety issue. The other clubs will probably complain about it. They'll probably send video. The competition committee will go through their own video and see where it comes down. Look, hopefully nobody's going to get hurt. But the bottom line is, when you see it, it's to perfection. I'm not a homer. I don't root for any teams. Yes, I live here in Philly, and I've covered the Eagles for over 20 years. But you're right, I cover the entire league. It is kind of funny to talk to old school people around the league who think it should be outlawed. I kind of laugh. I'm like, well, why? What? It's just different. I think Carolyn, what happens in this business is when you see something that you haven't seen before, you're skeptical, like, well, what is this? Why aren't other teams doing it? It must not be right. Well, that's really what we're getting here.
And does that then turn into a little bit of politics when you talk about taking these to the competition committee? I mean, pegging it as a safety issue, well, that may or may not be the case when, quite frankly, there's so many things that could be, I guess, deemed a safety issue in a sport that's just inherently dangerous. But, is that where you get some other teams maybe a little bit turned off by the fact that they can't execute it in the way that Philadelphia has seemingly been able to, and so they want it wiped away from the playbook? I mean, take us inside the sort of internal politics of it all, and why, in the first place, it is seemingly so difficult to execute with the kind of efficiency that Philadelphia has been able to do.
I know. And look, I'll be at the owners' meetings in March, and I know the way these work. So what could happen is it could get to the ownership level where the head coach or the general manager gets the owner on it to make sure this gets out there if they don't like it, if they want it outlawed. So that could happen. But it goes to the competition committee. And here's another thing that we don't hear as much, but I know what's going on. There have been some times when it very clearly, it hasn't happened a lot, but you could see, and we also see this with other teams too, when they just have a 4th and 1 where you can push, but you're not allowed to pull the player's jersey, your quarterback. You can see over the years where sometimes the refs miss it, where the teammate tugs on the jersey to pull the player. You're not allowed to do that. You can push, but you cannot pull. So I'm so interested to see what happens here. But it is funny how it's been a national outrage. Now, I know a lot of media people who are against it. A lot of them say now they think it's a thing of beauty, although there's some old school reporters simply will not accept it. I get that.
As it relates to the trade deadline, Adam, I know I got you for just a couple more minutes here, so I just want to kind of hit on maybe some specific players that you're keeping an eye on. Which teams you think should really be buying? Which teams you think should really be selling? Which players stand out to you?
All right, so I wrote for Pro Football Network. One of the teams I'm going to be watching are the Carolina Panthers. I'll be honest with you, I thought they'd be way better. I spent 2 days with them in Spartanburg, South Carolina at their training camp, and I'm kind of stunned that they're 0-6. At the bye here. Now they're going to get some injured players back. What I'm looking at here is what do they do with Brian Burns? Last year, I'm told they turned down a 1st and 2nd round pick. No, I'm sorry, 2 future ones. They didn't from the Rams. The Rams didn't have a 1st. It was 2 1s and I think a 2nd or 3rd round pick. And they turned it down because Brian Burns is an excellent pass rusher. It's hard to find those guys. But now that they're 0-6, what do they really have to play for? Obviously, the chances of making even a wild card are slim to none. I get it's a bad division, worst division in the National Football League, but they're not going to win the division. and they haven't gotten Brian Burns' contract extension done. So that's a team to look at. What do the Washington Commanders do, who are 3-4, and they have a rematch against the Eagles, who they almost beat in an overtime game in Philly in Week 4? What do they do with Montez Sweat and Chase Young, who are unsigned for next season? Keep an eye on them. What do the Minnesota Vikings do with Danielle Hunter, as I wrote for Pro Football Network this week? Danielle Hunter is a special pass rusher. He's healthy. This is the best he's looked in his career. Quite frankly, he looks incredible. If they lose this week and go to 3-5, you have to wonder if their front office looks to trade him. That's a team I look at. Buffalo, keep an eye on. They're looking for a replacement for Matt Milano. That's possible. I know they want to try some internal candidates. They may be in the linebacker market. Kansas City is always looking. Brett Veach is very aggressive. Their general manager. The Eagles, who made the trade for Kevin Byard, and they needed safety help. They may be looking at cornerback help as we get closer to Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. The Lions, they need some corners. They're a little bit banged up in the secondary there at cornerback. I think that's a team to look at. And what does San Francisco do? All of a sudden, they've lost 2 games. They don't seem to care about future draft capital, as we know they like to trade it away, and that McCaffrey trade's been great for them so far. So those would be some teams to look at.
Kevin Byard is an interesting player. I mean, who do you think came out on the upside of that move?
You know what's funny about that trade, Carolyn? So the 6th-round pick that they gave to Tennessee was actually Tennessee's originally. The Eagles traded away a safety who had been with them a week or two last summer, Ugo Amadi, who formerly is from Seattle. So they got a 6th-round pick back, and now they just traded back to Tennessee, and part of that trade, I think that's comical. Look, who got the better in the trade? The Eagles did, because we could argue whether a 30-year-old safety is on the downside of his career, but Kevin Byard is incredibly durable, super high character guy, still a good football player. And the Eagles are so down on depth and talent at the safety position, they had to do it. Their number 1 priority was safety. Number 2, nickel corner. They've gone through 4 nickel corners, so they have to look at that. And then for Tennessee, they're playing for the future. They have no chance to make the playoffs, and they're trying to figure out the quarterback position. They're in a semi-rebuild. They won't call it a rebuild, but I'll call it a semi-rebuild.
Last thing for you, and then I'll get you out of here with this. It's kind of sad that you start talking about the coaching carousel at the halfway point of the season, but that's the NFL and kind of where we are right now. And a lot of people talking about Bill Belichick. Can he catch Don Shula picking up another win against Buffalo, taking it to that 300 mark? Is he vulnerable in your opinion? I know a lot of people are talking about his future with how terrible New England has been. If he is or if he isn't, and then aside from that too, what other coaches you think are in potential hot water already at the halfway point?
Well, yeah, I don't do any speculation. I haven't really done that in my career, but I tell you where the teams have to start winning or there's just going to be more unrest is with the Chargers. We'll get to Belichick in a second. The Chargers 2-4. Spent 2 days with them in training camp. I didn't think it'd be a great team. I had them for 9 or 10 wins. They're 2-4. I know that the last spot's open. The AFC, Buffalo at 4-3 is right now that's the last wild card seed. I'm really disappointed with the Chargers. I thought they'd be a lot better. Their defense has been really bad under Brandon Staley. I don't get that. Now let's get over to Belichick. At 2-5, they had a great win over the Bills last week in Foxborough. Robert Kraft. Look, let's call it like it is. Robert Kraft kind of called out Bill without mentioning his name in the spring about they got at draft better, and he called out the decision to make Matt Patricia the offensive coordinator, saying that put Patricia in a tough spot because he's really not an offensive guy, Carolyn. So, look, I know there's an NFL Network report that Belichick got his contract extended before the season started. As I know, all coaches' contracts just about have offset language, right, which means if you fire a coach and he gets hired by another team, that the original team that had the contract, the team that fired him, gets credit. They get money back on that new contract. And again, I'm not saying they're looking to get rid of Belichick, but if they don't make the playoffs, there'll be some serious heat for the next season. But these things work. These things take care of themselves. The Chargers had higher expectations. I know we're only through 6 games. They've had a bye already, but that's a team to me where you shake your head, and I don't understand that, why their defense is so bad. That would be it. We could certainly talk late in the season about kind of where these things are going. But it's typical, you've covered the business many years, as I have. There's surprises, disappointments every single year. The NFL has what they have always told me, that they want a competitive balance. They sure have that. there are a lot of bad football teams. There's some teams that have been surprises, and this is what we get in this business.
And at the end of the day, I mean, it is just such an uber profitable league that as long as teams are making money, I think that
Exactly.
takes the sting out of some. And it kind of depends. It's a supply and demand thing, too. As you know, it really depends on who's available to fill potential vacancy if you're talking about letting Bill Belichick go. Thanks so much for the time, Adam. Appreciate it. I do hope to catch up with you later on in the season when maybe some of these moves become bigger question marks.